From the Twin Cities, this is Night Times Magazine with Gary Gilson.
Good evening and welcome to World Series warm-up. Tonight it's the investigative reporters against the critics as we look in on some news people teaming up to help each other do a better job. Next we meet a producer for 60 Minutes, Marion Golden, who ponders what an investigative journalist should be entitled to do. And then we look at fall fashions for women and how store buyers try to anticipate what they can sell to you. Now our cover story. I've always thought that it was odd that America did not have an Oriana Fallaci, a journalist whose knowledge of history and interviewing skills propel us closer to the soul of her subjects than anyone else seems able to do. On television, our pace setter is Mike Wallace, the Grand Inquisitor, a man that some people love to hate. Even though 60 Minutes is often the top-rated program of the week, you hear a lot of resentment for the program's investigative tactics and for Wallace's bulldog style. Well, over the weekend, one of the most interesting things I saw was a television interview with Mike Wallace. Not Wallace asking questions on 60 Minutes, but Wallace answering questions on Channel 2, and the subject was his life. He did some squirming, not because the interviewer was rough on him, but because he was rough on himself. It seems that Mike Wallace had a real struggle trying to decide what to do with his considerable talent, and when he finally took his wife's advice and decided to make a commitment to being a reporter, his past career as an entertainer haunted him and kept him from winning the approval of some of his new colleagues in the news business. Mike Wallace's quest for respectability, as he recounted it, was very moving. He revealed his humanity, and I came away from that liking him very much indeed. Reporters come in all shapes and sizes, from all political persuasions. Not all of them are investigators, some are romantics. But most of them have a sense of mission. They want to serve the public by letting people know what is going on. It's a hard job. And as Walter Lippmann said, the news is not the same as the truth. The truth takes longer to get at. Some investigative reporters from around here are determined to keep on looking for it.
Minnesota is a very squeaky clean state, yet I did a fairly good series on occupational health problems and dirty work environments.
A few hundred news people got together last weekend at the Radisson in Minneapolis for a regional conference of an organization called Investigative Reporters and Editors. They wanted to sharpen their skills in investigating such stories as official corruption, chemical pollution, and corporate wrongdoing. And they wanted to talk over ethical and legal problems their work raises.
We learn here, basically, how the profession feels about what is right and wrong, our approach to journalism, how it's being accepted across the country.
I guess basically what I hope to get out of it is sharing ideas, techniques, tricks, methods to pry information loose from sources, the fun of telling war stories to fellow reporters and feeling a support group.
Karen Brannon is a freelance reporter whose series in the Twin Cities Reader on the Star and Tribune's role in downtown land development apparently led the Star to publish its own long-awaited story. What made you decide to become an investigative reporter?
I hated being a school teacher. I've always been extremely curious and extremely nosy. I love to write, and I think primarily because I have for the last 10 years become increasingly aware of how little we're getting in our daily newspapers and on TV of what's really going on out there.
I got tired of being jerked around by politicians and business people who were telling me what they wanted people to hear and not having the time to challenge them. I use the example of the Texas senator who gets off the airplane and the general assignments reporter is sent out to cover his arrival, and he tells you why natural gas ought to be deregulated. The best a general assignments reporter can do is run across the street and find someone who disagrees with that senator and put opposing views in juxtaposition on the air or in a newspaper. An investigative reporter with a little bit more time might find the challenging remark himself, the challenging fact. So when the senator says natural gas prices ought to be deregulated, can come back with a second question and say, well, what about this, Senator? Isn't it true, Senator? Your voting record doesn't show you believe this, Senator. I felt jerked around quite a bit. Not reporting, but merely amplifying what other people had to say.
We're all in the right business, I think. I think we can be very proud of the fact that we're in the right business. It's a wonderful way to spend a life.
Seymour Hersh, known as Cy, was a freelance reporter when he broke the story of the My Lai massacre in the Vietnam War. He won a Pulitzer Prize, went to work for the New York Times, found the paper's attitude toward investigative reporting of corporations too limiting, and has turned to writing books. He's working on one now about Kissinger and Nixon.
Here I am, I'm just digging around I'm not only digging around in Kissinger, who's, ample enough target, but also Nixon. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people that can watch Richard Nixon get impeached on television 3 times a week. And I think our function is I'm a purist, and I think our function is to do it the best you can, fight as hard with your editor as you can. If you have to tell them the Washington Post is going to break it tomorrow to get it in, you tell them the Washington Post is going to break it tomorrow to get it in, and sing and dance. I think any white lie or act of sin to get the story in print inside your newspaper is legitimate. I think any act to get the story isn't. I mean, the fellow I was on a panel with was talking about newspaper guys lying, cheating to get stories, and we don't do that. I mean, maybe some aberration does. Most of us really play it straight. I play it very crooked to get them into the paper once I have them in. I mean, I'll just say anything to any editor. Jack Anderson called me today. He said he's got the story, I find that's the hardest part. Usually in the Times you could say the Washington Post, you don't have to finish the sentence, which is why competition is wonderful.
Across the hall in a workshop, they were talking about some of the aberrations Cy Hirsch alluded to, like invasion of privacy.
The notion of filming a child snatching in action was irresistible. I know it was legal, but was it right?
Marion Golden, for the past 10 years, has been a producer for 60 Minutes.
I'd like to mention something that I've noticed really fairly recently, which is that invasion of privacy has become the high-sounding standard bearer used by people who really don't like what we do under any name. And so instead of saying, you shouldn't investigate that corrupt city government or that corrupt business, they say, not bad work, but did you really have to invade their privacy?
Criticism of investigative reporting on television, especially of techniques used by 60 Minutes, recently led 60 Minutes to examine itself.
Next, we showed the panel an excerpt from a story that employed even more elaborate deception. We wanted to expose allegedly fraudulent practices in an allegedly phony cancer clinic, practices that were potentially harmful. But how to demonstrate what that clinic was really like, what its practices really were? Well, a 60 Minutes producer and camera crew, posing as patient and entourage, signed up for the treatment and spent more than 9 days at Murrieta back in 1977. Why? Because we felt the best way to learn about, expose this phony, expensive, and potentially dangerous clinic and its proprietor, R.J. Rudd, was from the inside with a phony patient. To find out what it was really like, and because we'd been told the bottom line was dollars, we told them soundman Camry, whom we dubbed the Colonel, was a wealthy, semi-retired investment counselor who had just learned he had leukemia. That cameraman Cook, a traveling photographer by trade, was his concerned nephew. That producer Golden was the Colonel's longtime secretary.
Marion Golden of 60 Minutes is with us here in the studio. Very nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
You recently produced a program for 60 Minutes, which was, in essence, 60 Minutes Looks at Itself, because a lot of people in the news business and outside have some reservations or complaints about the way you go about your business. The Murrieta piece we just looked at, in which you and the crew were undercover, could you have done that story in a different way that didn't use those undercover techniques, misrepresenting your identity?
I believe the answer is no. There are obviously others who believe the answer is yes. And for those of you in your audience who saw the Looking at 60 Minutes, Eugene Patterson, the editor of the St. Petersburg paper, says you use old-fashioned shoe leather, you amass the victims who've gone into that clinic and been treated and mistreated, and you present your information. I believe passionately, and I hope correctly, that the most reliable way to have done that story is the way we did it. We amassed victims, we talked to people who had been there, but we went to see for ourselves. How else do you know whether those people are telling the truth, whether they don't have an axe to grind, whether their information is all that reliable until you can match it with your own experience?
What if you said you went and did it, but you didn't film it, and you satisfied yourself as to the testimony of those victims, and then just came on and reported it?
We're in the television business. We're in the television news business, and I not only don't apologize for that, I rejoice in that. If I were working for a newspaper, that's what I would have done. But television news has other demands, and once again, I don't apologize for those demands. I'm proud of them.
Now, news people generally criticize police departments when the police say, we'll examine these charges of police brutality. The police don't like that. Some people say, well, 60 Minutes looking at itself can be self-serving. How would you respond to that?
Did you see the broadcast?
I sure did.
Was it?
I think in some ways it was. I think in other ways it was more revealing than Don Hewitt, probably the executive producer, would have liked it. And I think that it was a step ahead. But when I was producing for Hot and Carter last spring and tried to get an interview with 60 Minutes about a story and the process of resistance that a business was giving 60 Minutes, wouldn't sit down for an interview without unedited airtime, 60 Minutes said, no, we won't talk to you. Now, why would you not talk to an outside investigator and put on your own program?
Well, I am a producer for 60 Minutes. I am not the executive producer. If I were the executive producer of 60 Minutes, I probably would have sat down and talked to you.
Well, good. I would have liked that. Don Hewitt in that program that you produced said that 60 Minutes, as a result of some of this criticism and self-examination, was going to do away with some of these questionable tactics. For example, ambush interviews where you run up on somebody and grab him when he least suspects you're there. Is that happening?
I don't know. I know what Don said on that broadcast. I would like to think he left a little crack in the door for those times when at least I believe it is still an essential and valuable tool of investigative reporting on television.
The television stations across the country, from big markets to small ones, look at 60 Minutes and say, hey, let's do that. It looks like fun and we can get some bad guys. How well do they do at it?
Well, first of all, I have not seen very much of it at all. And what I have seen is mixed. Obviously, that many stations, that many reporters, producers, camera crews doing that much of anything is bound to produce mixed results. I guess let me say what we're accused of. Let me accentuate the negative. Let me say that some of what I've seen, too much of even a little bit I've seen, really seems to be a caricature of itself. And I think it has helped in some measure to give the whole area of television investigative reporting a little bit of a black eye. I don't mean to say that only we at 60 Minutes with our power and prestige and professionalism are the only ones to do it. Not for a moment. We all should do it sparingly and carefully and only when we're persuaded that it's the only way to do an important story.
Is the game worth the candle? Sometimes you go out and you get a crook, and it's like a pebble in the ocean. I remember one time a newspaper won a Pulitzer Prize for turning out a corrupt sheriff in Florida, and the day after the Pulitzer Prizes were announced, the voters swept the guy back into office. Do you get results that have a broad impact in the United States?
Well, you raised two very important and I think very different questions. One is, can we, must we, should we be responsible for uncovering only that information that the voters will agree with? I can think of a congressman from California in Washington who was revealed to have had all kinds of questionable financial and sexual relationships during Koreagate. Just because the voters in his district returned him to office, I don't think that's any reason not for us not to cover that story and uncover that story. The pebble in the ocean is another question, which is, do we go after targets that are not worth it, whether the voters turn them in or out of office? And I think that the answer is, of course, sometimes yes, but not as much as our critics would have us and you believe. The people that we often go after, quote unquote, have an enormous amount of influence over the lives of people. They are basically, they come under the heading of consumer stories, consumer interests. Their victims are the little people in this country, in this nation, in this city, who have nobody else to act as their surrogate.
Why would anybody let Mike Wallace through the door?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is because they don't know he's coming. And to be a little bit more serious, I think there are a couple of reasons. A lot of us have fairly large egos. We are flattered by his attention and the attention of 60 Minutes. We believe that we can succeed where we have seen others fail, quote unquote. And I think because most of us don't think of ourselves as bad guys. We believe we don't have anything to hide.
And then they find out that they've made a mistake. And sometimes they sue. What's 60 Minutes' experience with lawsuits?
Well, I don't know how many have been started, but I do know one thing. We have never lost one.
You labored in the vineyards for many years like the rest of us, doing programs that you believed in, and you were sure that hardly anybody was watching except maybe the family and close friends. All of a sudden, you're the #1 program in television. What did it feel like to suddenly know that people were watching?
Well, it happened gradually, so it isn't, it's hard to really say that I or any of us woke up one night and said, Hosanna, my God, we're #1, even though there was that day in November of 1978 when this Monday, I guess, or Tuesday or Tuesday after the Sunday, the word came that we had achieved the #1 ranking in the ratings. But it happened so gradually after so much work. It's gratifying. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to know that after all the work, all the disappointments, all the frustrations, all the fun, that people notice and watch and care.
Marion, keep plugging. You know that all of us will be watching.
I hope so.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Would you look at that mug? Now, what has he got that I ain't got? With the possible exception of a contract. I wish I could be on the I-Team. The I-Team is the team I love. I wish I could be on the I-Team. The I-Team is the only team that I'm dreaming of. I wish I could be a reporter with my schnozzle in the secret files and my miniature tape recorder, picking up the expletives for miles. I'd like to blow the lid off every scandal in sight, bust into a motel room and flip on the lights, and flash it on the network news on prime time tonight. I really got a nose for news. I'd like to put the finger on the Washington set, a new exclusive interview with Rita Jenrette. I'd tell the world about the news, what ain't happened yet. I really got a nose for news. Oh, can't you see that I could be the best reporter in the land? I got stars in my eyes for a Pulitzer Prize and $1 million contract in my hot little hand. I wish I could be your reporter, exposing graft and greed and fraud, a champion outlaw and order. And when I speak, a billion pairs of hands would applaud. I'll give 'em the scoop, I'll give 'em some thrills, I'll give 'em fancy visuals with all of the frills. It may not give 'em insight, but it will give 'em chills. I really got a nose for news. I got potential. I really got a nose for news. You listening, CCO? I really got a nose for... There are 2 million stories in the Twin Cities, and I'm gonna tell every one of them. I really got a nose for news. Da-da-da-da-da-da.
On vocal, Tom Haig. On keyboard, Joanne Ferris. On bass, Mrs. Calabash, wherever she is. They tell me that fashion is back in fashion. Dressing for success seems much more important in a recession. After all, when you're rolling in the bucks, who cares about image? I mean, who do you have to impress? But these days, women are looking for the right look. The question is, who's going to figure out what they want? Here's a report from Deborah Stone.
What am I going to wear?
Serious business?
Ruffles and bows?
Classical classics?
opulent elegance. Golden glitter. It's the year of variety in women's fashions. Long skirts, short skirts, ruffles, bows. It's a smorgasbord of delights for a shopper to choose from. But as we make those heavy decisions about what we like versus what we can afford, the folks in the fashion industry are hoping that their gamble will pay off and that the things they chose are the things we'll buy.
We cannot tolerate overstocks. It ties up investment money in inventories, obviously. So, yes, we have a budget that we work out.
Deborah Reynolds is one of over 100 buyers for Dayton's.
And it's very difficult. Being a buyer, you're eternally optimistic. You always feel that business is going to be good. You always know that what you have bought is the right thing, that it's going to sell, at least you hope it will. And there's always too much to buy. So what we are doing is testing merchandise. For instance, we brought in a few knickers in some departments this year. A knicker is a short cropped pant. Sold extremely well, like as much as 40% sell off a week. When we see something like this, other departments will go in and buy it in depth. And this is what tells us, the customer has told us that this is selling. We have now told the customer that this is what she has to buy.
So you take a walk downtown, way downtown, to the fashion capital.
When a woman buys a new outfit, she has to sort out what's stylish from what's just a fad. The store buyer has to do essentially the same thing, but on a much larger scale.
You go out to New York and there's a glut of fashion out there. How do you know what to buy?
Everybody makes mistakes, and certainly buyers do too. We just try to minimize the mistakes that we make. But again, our business is a testing and reorder business to a certain extent, and if we can hit on one or two items, or if we miss an item and another store picks it up, and we hear that the store is selling it very well, we can always go back to the market and buy that. So we don't miss out on too much as a result of that, which is nice.
Are there more successes than failures in the business?
Yeah, I would say so. Dayton's has been in business a long time, so there must have been a few successes on that. But yes, we all have our failures. And you look at the clearance racks, you can see a few failures, but that's part of being a human being too. You can't be 100% correct all the time, but we'd like to be.
Buyers can hedge their bets by testing out the market. The designer has to go for broke with one line per season and gambles not on what works now, but what will work next year.
The fall line won't be shown until March 1982, but you begin to look at it, really now is the time. The general tendencies that I'm working on for spring and summer will be going forward into the fall as well. I think they'll be very strong and hold. In some instances, I guess with the so-called prep look, there was a time when, for me anyway, that was over and that was done, and it was time to move into something else. And it's just a question of really having a feel for what's desirable. The newest feeling is much softer, much more romantic. The ruffles and the lace and the full skirts, the longer skirts. I think that's probably the most important look and feeling that is in the market right now.
Christian Dior, he works so hard. Poor man, he drives me crazy.
Does politics affect dress at all? It seems that in the 1960s everyone wore jeans and everyone's dressing up more now with Nancy Reagan.
Right.
Does that have much effect?
I think it does. Jacqueline Kennedy made a big impact on fashion when she was First Lady. I guess Nancy Reagan has definitely influenced the market. For example, red, which is supposed to be her favorite color, is very strong. Red is back. Also, I would say that Nancy Reagan is a real dress person, and so the importance of dresses has really been strong.
One thing you won't find a lot of this season is bargains. Everything on the racks seems to cost more than it did last year. But browsing is still free, and just when you think you've captured the look, they'll bring in the clothes for spring.
The fashion for a late October World Series is thermal underwear. So it's the Dodgers and the Yankees again. And the first ball will be thrown out by Joe DiMaggio. It figures he was one of the greatest ball players ever, the shy but forceful Yankee Clipper, a superstar who married Marilyn Monroe and now does commercials for a big New York bank. So we know the answer to the musical question, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? This all takes me back to 1947 when my dad took me to Yankee Stadium for the 6th game of that Yankee-Dodger series. DiMaggio showed some emotion for maybe the only time in his career when he hit what looked like a home run into the left field bullpen. Almost. An outfielder for the Dodgers, a substitute named Al Gianfrido, leaped for the ball, caught it, and held on as he landed on the bullpen fence. DiMaggio was near second base, confident of rounding them all, when he saw the catch, and he shocked everybody by kicking angrily at the dirt. For Al Gianfrido, it was his final act as a major leaguer. The next year, he played for minor league Montreal against St. Paul in the Junior World Series. So my question today was, where have you gone, Al Gianfrido? Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. It was great fun tracking him down. He answered the phone at the boys' gymnasium at San Marcos High School in Santa Barbara, California, where he is athletic equipment manager. He and his wife raised 3 boys and 3 girls. He had a restaurant called Al's Dugout for 12 years. He's 59 now, and he keeps in shape by playing racquetball. He'll be watching the game tonight and rooting for who else? The Dodgers. Twins rooters have to satisfy themselves with their own nostalgia, like this look at opening day of this final year at Met Stadium.
We got heart, all you really need is heart. When the odds are saying you'll never win, that's when the grit should start. We got hope, we don't sit around and moan. Not a solitary sob do we heave, it's because we've got hope. We're so happy that we're humming. That's a hearty thing to do. And we know our ship will come in. Though it's 10 years overdue. We got heart, miles and miles and miles apart. Always fine to be a genius, of course. The king that all horse before the car. We gotta get better 'cause we can't get worse. And to add to it, we got heart. We got heart. We got heart.
Yes, it's baseball.
Can anyone doubt for a moment that that tape belongs in a time capsule with the ascent of man? I'll see you on Thursday.
Night Times is a production of KTCA Channel 2, which is solely responsible for its content. Night Times Thursday Magazine is made possible by a grant from the Pillsbury Company Foundation on behalf of Totino's. Live from the Twin Cities, this is Night Times Magazine with Gary Gilson.
Good evening. Political turmoil in Poland keeps on making headlines. And on our program tonight, we meet some Minnesota farmers who care enough about the plight of hungry Poles to send them food, and who see uncomfortable parallels between the totalitarianism of the communist state and farm policies in the United States. Next in our studio, we meet one of the country's most single-minded fighters for civil liberties, writer Nat Hentoff, who is deeply concerned about what's happening right now to threaten constitutional freedoms. Then we introduce you to a very gentle soul doing the unlikeliest thing, pumping iron. Now our cover story. Poland's Solidarity Union is calling for another strike to protest against food shortages, and the situation there is touchier than it has been since March. It was surprising to see the people standing up against the government, but not so surprising to see that food production in the Eastern European breadbasket was failing, because after World War II, Poland poured its resources into a strong military and industrial complex and broke up family farms in favor of state-owned farms that have proved to be far less efficient. Here in Minnesota, some farmers belong to a socially progressive group known as the American Agricultural Movement. They don't like our government's farm policies any more than they like what they see happening in Poland. About a dozen western Minnesota farmers have decided to help feed hungry Poles. In some ways, these Americans think they and the Polish people are in the same boat.
Chuck Canton's wheat harvest is in. It was not a great year. A June hailstorm cut his wheat yield in half. Costs are up, prices are down. But even so, Chuck has given some of his wheat away. It's on its way to feed hungry people in Poland. Chuck and Ann Canton are feisty farmers from western Minnesota. They raise wheat, sugar beets, and occasionally a little hell about American farm policies. Through the American Agricultural Movement, they're involved in international food issues.
For the power of the Solidarity Movement.
When television news brought home images of hungry Poles, they couldn't stand idle.
We have followed with great interest what's been happening with the Solidarity Movement in Poland, and the fact that the Polish farmers try to legitimize whether or not they could unionize as other segments of the society. That was interesting to us because the American farmer cannot legally unionize. And so the American Agriculture Movement in Washington began a dialogue with the Solidarity Movement in Poland. And we decided that as American farmers we would do all we could to support them, both emotionally and then eventually with actual gifts of food.
Dave Bonk farms more than 1,300 acres in partnership with his two sons. When the call came for donations, he found it hard to resist. His father came here from Poland at 17, fleeing in the middle of the night to avoid serving in the Russian army.
It's your heritage where the people came from, and I think everybody has a soft spot in their heart for their motherland or fatherland, whatever you want to call it, the people that they originated from. And I think I'm no different than anybody else.
Was that part of why you got involved in the Polish grain relief effort?
Well, no, not really. Whether they would have been Polish or Norwegian or whatever the nationality, just at what they're going through and what they're standing up against and standing up to now. A lot like in this country, it's in Poland it was against the law for the farmers to have a union, and it's also against law in the United States for the farmers to have a union. And the United States farmers, we can't do anything about it. We can't get together enough to do nothing. But those people looking down the Russian gun barrel and armies and troops all over, they stood up and they got the law changed so they were allowed to have a union. And I just think that takes a lot of starch to do that.
The farmers converted their wheat to cash at local elevators. They've collected about $1,100 so far. Eventually, the money will buy food for Poland, where the Catholic Church and Solidarity will make sure it gets to the people who need it most. But it was more than just hungry people that motivated the farmers to give. They saw a dark parallel between what had happened to the family farm in Poland and what was happening in America. Ann Canton hopes that her son Kent, the fourth generation of Canton farmers, will be able to make a living off the land.
To be a farmer is an actual emotional tie to the caring and work with the soil. When you separate production from ownership, then you're in trouble. And that, of course, is what has happened in all of Eastern Europe with their attempt to consolidate ownership and work that way. It has meant less production of food. And that is the direction that a lot of American land is going, and that I think eventually that'll mean that we're in trouble as far as food production is concerned.
The farmers have accomplished two things. They've helped feed hungry people in Poland, and they've called attention to a crisis on the family farm. Minnesota farmers lost more money last year than at any other time in history, more than $1 billion. And the prospects for this year look worse.
The secret of the affluence in America has been cheap food. But in the process, we have destroyed over 50% of the families on the land. We have simply broken them and moved them out. I think the family farm system is the greatest protection that the American consumer has, both for quality and quantity of good food. And with the destruction of that system, I think this country is in trouble.
So far in North and South Dakota and Minnesota, $10,000 has been raised. The General Mills Foundation has just announced it is sending 35 tons of gold medal flour to Poland. The Teamsters will haul it and the longshoremen will load it without cost. My guest tonight is Nat Hentoff, the writer and one of the country's most forceful advocates of civil liberties. His reporting and commentary appear mainly in the New Yorker and in the Village Voice. He has unusual qualities. He says clearly what he means, and he stands up for what he believes in. But as I was thinking about seeing him tonight, the quality that came through strongest to me was the sense that I have that Nat Hentoff is always there. He is part of the landscape in a time when so much in our culture comes and goes. Whether you or I agree with his positions or not, he is an important part of the national dialogue. Nat, it is delightful to have you here.
Thank you.
What threats to civil liberties do you see on the scene today?
Oh, my. You want a tape about 40 hours?
Now, let's take the ones that you're most worried about.
I'm most worried about the various elements of the First Amendment, which is our right, everybody's right to freedom of speech, of assembly, pardon me, the right of the press, which means books as well as magazines and newspapers, to be free of constraint, post-publication as well as pre-publication. And all of that is in considerable danger on a number of fronts. In Washington, for example, the House of Representatives passed about 2 weeks ago, and the Senate is now, I use the term loosely, wrestling with a similar version of this bill, a bill that for the first time in American history makes it a crime for anybody, journalist, anybody, to print something that is in the public domain, nothing classified, nothing secret, if that material in the public domain in any way tends to identify a covert intelligence agent, CIA, FBI, whatever, whether he is currently an agent, whether he retired 20 years ago, whether he participated in a crime when he was an agent. The House passed this outrageous bill by a vote of something like 354 to 56.
And how does it stand in the Senate?
The Senate has passed a slightly narrower, the Senate Committee on Intelligence, Subcommittee on Intelligence, has passed a slightly narrower version of the bill, which I find indistinguishable from the bill that the House passed. Some kind of bill will pass on the floor. There's no doubt this bill will be passed by Congress sometime this year in one or another outrageous form. Then it goes to the courts. And my friends in the Civil Liberties Union, some of them say, well, we don't have to worry. On the face of it, it's unconstitutional. On the face of it, it was unconstitutional to take away the passport from Philip Agee because he had done no criminal act.
The former CIA man.
Former CIA. I happen not to like what Agee does in naming names, etc., but that was this Supreme Court is a kind of a runaway Supreme Court in terms of its intense fear of doing anything that might endanger what it considers to be national security.
What are the impulses that produce such a bill?
There is, this country has always been in danger of forgetting what it is. It's always been in danger of being un-American, that is, not caring about the Bill of Rights, not caring about the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment, privacy, when there is a fear among significantly large enough groups of the population of some outside menace. In 1798, this was only 7 years after we passed the Bill of Rights, because there was a danger of a war with France, that Congress passed a bill called the Alien and Sedition Acts, which put writers and editors in jail because they simply criticized President John Adams. It happened in the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, of all people, suspended the writ of habeas corpus. First World War was incredible what happened to civil liberties. Second World War was somewhat better. Then came the Cold War and Joseph McCarthy and the Un-American Activities Committee. Now there is again the Russian danger. There is the fear of nuclear war, etc. And so as we try to oppose Russia, we become more and more like a totalitarian state in the way we think. I don't say you or I necessarily, but certainly members of Congress.
In this book, The First Freedom, which you wrote last year, there's a paragraph quoting a young girl named Deborah Lipp from New Jersey who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And she said, "I've been told I should go to Russia. Perhaps the people who feel this way, people who don't like to hear different opinions expressed, would feel more at home there."
Yeah.
Which is something akin to what
Oh,
you're
yeah,
saying.
she's one of my heroines. I must say that as a reporter, which is really what I am essentially, the things that keep me going are people like Deborah Lipp who had the courage to know what her First Amendment rights were. You do not have to stand up when the Pledge of Allegiance is given. And she was vindicated in court. She stood up to her father, who thought she was crazy. She stood up to local editorial writers. She stood up to hate mail and hate telephone calls. And then there's a marvelous young woman named Kathy Russell, who's about 22, 3 years old. She's a librarian in Washington County in Virginia, very conservative Baptist county. And a local minister, a moral majority type guy, and a local politician descended on her. This is about 8 months ago, and said, you have filth. You have the most degrading books in your library by people like Harold Robbins. And instead of cowering or trying to make a deal, she stood up to them. And somehow, she has no experience in, as they say, handling media. But she knew enough. Every time they got on the radio or television or in the newspapers, Kathy Russell insisted that, in fairness, she should speak. And she kept saying the same thing. You have the right to read, you people in Washington County, whatever you want to read. It's your tax money as well as the Reverend's tax money that keeps these books in. I'm not endorsing any of these books, and I have no right to take any of these books out of the library, nor does he. And she won.
Let's talk about censorship and young people.
Right.
You're here to talk to the College of Education, and one of the things on their mind is stuff that gets into the school and sometimes raises the ire of parents. The courts have ruled consistently that stuff that's in the school library can't be taken out, right?
Oh, I wish that were true. This is a very confused, messed up scene in terms of the courts. What the courts have said differs according to various circuits. You know, there's the lowest level. This is all federal court stuff. Federal District Court, then the various Circuit Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court has not, until this term, decided to take a case that will, for the first time, I'm a little apprehensive, will rule on this. Some courts have said this. There is no constitutional right for a child that his school should have a library. But once a school does have a library, the members of the Board of Education or the superintendent or anybody in charge does not have a right to remove books solely because those books offend his political or his social values or they got dirty words in them. Or if the removal indicates that certain ideas are supposed to be absolutely taboo, nobody can do that. On the other hand, in other circuits, the courts have said, school board, mandated by law, to be in charge of the curriculum, including books, they are in charge of inculcating the values of the community. Community doesn't like a book for whatever reason, the school board can take it out. This is a very interesting thesis. Suppose the community values are racist or anti-Semitic or anti-Catholic. So you got these two clashes. And now the Supreme Court has taken a case out of New York, the Long Island case of the Island Trees School, and I'm very apprehensive because they're taking it at the wrong time. The case is supposed to go back for trial so you can develop the facts. The case has never been to trial at this point. The Supreme Court wants to see it now. I don't know why, but I'm fearful.
I was talking to a fellow named James Wald, who's a principal in a suburban high school here, and he said that the complaints come from people who are often concerned on moral or political grounds, And what they're concerned about is a film like The Lottery or a certain book being a symbol of general deterioration in the country's morality that they sense. But if the courts do support an anti-censorship approach, and there's so many people in the country who are concerned about general deterioration, what's the constituency that backs up the court system that allows civil libertarians to prevail?
The constituency is a document, a piece of paper. It's called the Constitution of the United States. And what we're talking about in this instance is the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment of which applies directly to the student's First Amendment right to read, the teachers' and librarians' right to disseminate information. The First Amendment and the rest of the Bill of Rights is not supposed to be put to a plebiscite, ever. It is never supposed to be put to a vote.
But there are some people in this administration who say that the times are so threatening that the First Amendment, free speech, and the Fourth Amendment, due process of law, maybe should be suspended to keep this republic together.
Well, as I say, that has been attempted in the past, and it succeeded for some periods of time, always with very savage results. If they do that, then they will have done what the Russians and no other foreign enemy of this country has ever done. They will have destroyed the reason for this country's being. Because, as I said before, otherwise we'll become like the other countries. What keeps us alive, what keeps us free, and we're still, with all of the inequities in the nation, and they are severe, we are undeniably the freest country in the world because we have this piece of paper called the Constitution. And the most important liberty of all the liberties in that document is the First Amendment, because how else can you complain about everything else unless you have the right to speak and to read?
Nat, can you trace back to the beginnings of your life where your feelings about these issues come from?
Oh, I think being Jewish in Boston in the 1930s, Boston was the most anti-Semitic city in the country then. Father Coughlin's social justice was hawked every Sunday, and goons came out at night beating up Jewish kids and old men. So that my sense of being in the need of civil liberties was very acute. I didn't know what they were called that then. And then as I began to write for my local school paper and then the Northeastern News, where I went to college, and we were exposing some of that anti-Semitic stuff, and then they told us we couldn't write. The administration said, you can't print that stuff, it has nothing to do with the campus, it might offend some people who give money to the school, and they forced us to decide whether to keep doing what we were doing, which we couldn't do and had to leave, or become like a service paper. And so we left. Then I became very interested in the First Amendment. And I think most people who are lifelong impassioned about the First Amendment, it starts viscerally, as it did with me. It starts with anger. And you realize that it's not only your First Amendment rights, if you want to secure them, that it's all indivisible. If some other guy or woman is including somebody you hate, like a Nazi, or whatever, if they're not allowed their First Amendment rights, then mine are no longer secure. So you have to be for everybody's rights.
Did you ever ask the FBI for your file under the Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah, I got a long file, mostly clips, and the only part in it that surprised me and annoyed me, and if J. Edgar Hoover had been still alive, I would have written him and asked him to reprimand his field guy. The FBI guy sent him a long piece I had done from Playboy, which was rather critical of the Bureau. And he went on beyond that to criticize my writing style. A little too hyperbolic, a little too aggressive, a little too abrasive. I'd like to find that guy.
Nat, thanks very much for being with us.
Bulging biceps and a powerful chest have long been held as masculine virtues, ideals sought after by young men who didn't want sand kicked in their faces by beach bullies. And even throughout history, the superhumans of myths and folk tales, like Hercules, Atlas, and Samson, have all been supermen. Where, then, is the female counterpart to these incredible hulks? Meet Joanne Johnson, office worker for a large organization by day, but at quitting time, this quiet, demure woman becomes something quite different. Joanne is one of a growing number of women who have decided that a woman's place is in the gym. At 25 years of age, Joanne is married and lives in Oakdale, Minnesota. And although she has only been bodybuilding for about a year, she already has won awards at 3 major competitions. So even here in the sanctuary of this once male-only environment, the barbells and the weight machines are beginning to receive a woman's touch.
Come on.
I've always been athletic, and this was something that I could do rather than team sports. I only had to count on myself. I chose bodybuilding because it was just a combination of all the things that I like to do, the athletic part of it and the mind work, and it was something that I was good at. It's made me feel more attractive, more sure of myself. I've got the confidence that I didn't have before. I feel a little more independent.
One more. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Yeah, good sit. Let's go. Contest winding down. A few more weeks.
When it hurts to the point where I want to quit, I have a doubt or two, but it never lasts long, and I know, tomorrow I'll be right back in there. I don't really have an ultimate goal. All I can see right now is this contest on October 10th, and I'm going to go for that.
The North Country Bodybuilding Championships were held less than 2 weeks ago in St. Paul. In addition to the standard men's competition, a women's event attracted a large following and gave Joanne an opportunity to see just how well her workouts were going.
Number 5, 6, and 7. 4 minutes. Women's open under 120 pound division. Number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, get ready. You're going to be on stage in about a minute.
And also the Central USA competition for 1981. Welcome, please, Patty Barr.
Backstage, just before I go out onto the stage, the tension's really kind of built up, but I tell myself, this is it, this is the best I can be, just be happy with that. You've worked hard, be proud of it.
Welcome, Joanne Johnson.
I feel nervous when I know that there are judges judging my every move, but that all goes away. I hear an occasional voice that's familiar to me and a fan yelling my number, and then I feel good.
Miss North Country Bodybuilding for 1981 is number 5, Joanne Johnson.
I've only gone on one blind date in my entire life, and I think this poem explains why. It's called Sturdy Arms. "You've got sturdy arms," he said to me, my blind date back in 1947. This Norwegian student who was studying to be a missionary to Madagascar. You'd make a good worker out on the mission field. I stood on the steps of Sievertson Hall, Augsburg College, just a few feet below the Mississippi River moved past to the university. That's where I should have gone, I thought to myself, where I'd meet some decent men, atheists and agnostics who'd be studying to get rich someday. Let me hire cleaning women so I could sit for hours in my room with my sturdy arm moving across the page, writing poem after poem after poem.
Why is it that Phoebe Hansen always knows the right thing to say at the right time? Did you see those snowflakes coming down a couple of hours ago? They say that Eskimos are so sensitive to their environment that even tiny Eskimo children can differentiate between 56 kinds of snowflakes. They are welcome to every blessed one of ours. See you on Tuesday.
Night Times Thursday magazine is made possible by a grant from the Pillsbury Company Foundation on behalf of Totino's. Night Times is a production of KTCA Channel 2, which is solely responsible for its content.